Hi guys, Paul here. Something really special happened today. I've hit over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and you know what that means? It means I get to release this awesome looking sci-fi pod model for you absolutely free. Not just cost free, but royalty free, which means you can use it in whatever you wish, and I won't sue you for it. So you can go ahead and download that right now. The link is in the notes below this video. But if you want to spend about, half an hour, 40 minutes with me, I'm going to show you how I went ahead and modeled this from start to finish. So you can learn some really cool Blender techniques to learn how to get this really nice plating that's got these beautiful sharp edges, how to create a gear, how to do some Boolean operations, all sorts of modeling techniques that will get you started in Blender, but also give you some really sophisticated looking models by the end of it. So if you want to do that, let's jump right in and let's get started on this tutorial. Now, here is the reference model. This is the original pod from Pangaea that I'm going to be remodeling. And so let's have a quick look at this. Now we see that we've got a mirror modifier on this spherical body, which has is basically one hull. It's obviously based on a sphere with a bit cut out of it, and then we've got this extra bit. We've got these 3 guns, a cog, let's see, we've got this entrance plate and a window. And that's about it. I've put this model on layer 2, so we can always just go keypad 2 to go to the reference. But let's go to layer 1 where we'll do all of our modeling. And in front view, I'm going to open up my toolbox on the left by hitting T so that we can see some of the properties of each modifier or a modeling operation that we're going to try. Now, of course, the first thing we have to do is to make sure that our units are set to a real world value. Now, I'm in Australia, and using metrics in Blender has been, in my experience, a lot easier than using the imperial system. But, this is a personal preference. You can make it feet or inches, but I'm going to go ahead and set it to meters. The length is metric, the angle degrees, and the unit scale is 1, which means that when we go ahead and go Shift A and add a UV sphere, you can see in the top there that it says front ortho meters. When we zoom out enough, each of these units that you see in the grid is 1 meter. And when we zoom in and we can actually see the overlay of the 10 units inside of that, let's just go to wireframe so we see that better. It says 10 centimeters, which means that each of these squares represent 10 centimeters. If we went in even further, we're at centimeters, and even further still, we're at millimeters. And so we can actually see real world values on the fly so that we know what kind of scale we're in. Now I'm going to bring up the N panel over here, because if I went into edit mode, you can actually display, mesh display lengths. Okay, and so let's just get rid of this sphere for a second, and let's bring in a plane. And I'm going to align this to view and go into edit mode, enable lengths. We can see that each of these edges is 2 meters by 2 meters. And so this radius, as it were, defaults to 1. Okay, and so if you think about it, the real world pod, if we go ahead and add our UV sphere again, that's obviously going to have a radius of 1 meter. So it's going to be 2 meters across, 2 meters high. And I think I want this to be just a little bigger, so we're going to go over here. Before we do anything to the sphere, we're going to make sure that we've got enough segments, enough rings, and the size is set correctly. Currently the size is the radius, and so we're going to set that to 1.5. Okay, so 1.5 means it's a 3 meter by 3 meter hull, which means inside would be kind of cozy, but it is sort of a 1-person pod. Now segments, I'm going to bump this right up because we do want a lot of resolution along this axis, and I want a lot of resolution on this, but I'm only going to bump it up to about 24. This should give us enough resolution without having to go into Subsurf modifiers. Let's go ahead and edit this now. So I'm going to go into tab. The parameters can no longer be fixed once you go into edit or anything like that. I'm going to make sure I'm in vertex select mode by hitting Control Tab and that gives us our Mesh Select Mode Specials menu, and you can switch between Vertex, Edge, and Face, and I want Vertex. Okay, and now I'm going to hit R to rotate. I'm going to hold down Control to snap to increment, and this will rotate in 5-degree increments until we get to 90 degrees. So now we've got our sphere rotated around. I'm going to hit A to deselect, and I'm going to hit B to box select all of this side of the sphere. I'm going to hit X and hit vertices to delete that half of the sphere. Why did I do this? Well, I'm going to go out of edit mode and go up to my modifiers panel over here in properties, and I'm going to add a mirror modifier. Automatically it's set to X, and lucky for us, the X axis reflects the axis that we want to mirror, and I'm going to enable clipping. What this means is if I go into edit mode, you see that you only have to edit half of the mesh, and anything you do to this side is reflected in the other side. This means that we only have to edit half the stuff. It means our modeling process should be cut down by approximately half, and you know it's an all-round win-win situation. So what we want to do, obviously, is first of all cut out this segment, and we see that the curve kind of continues along this point before it sort of juts out here. So why don't we go ahead and maybe delete an edge ring and then bring in an edge altogether. So the way we can do this, the easiest way, if you go Control, Tab, go into Edges, hold down Shift and Alt, and when you select that edge, the entire ring gets selected. Now there's a different operation that you can do with selection, and that is if you hold down Control, Shift and Alt and select, let's say select this edge, you select what's known as an edge ring. Okay, so this is a ring, and this is a loop. So those two operations again, Shift Alt, select an edge, you select the loop, Control Shift Alt, select an edge, you select the ring. Now if you were to select this edge, that's the ring, and that goes basically from the center all the way to the pole. So let's go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to delete this ring here. So Shift Alt and X to delete vertices. All right, so now we've got that nice gap. I'm going to now change my snapping increment to vertex. I'm going to click this magnet so that it automatically goes into snapping mode. And I'm going to go into Mesh Select Vertex mode. But I'm going to click on this ring here by selecting between these two vertices. So Shift Alt select. And now I'm going to hit E to extrude. And I'm going to hit X. This constrains that extrusion to the X axis in the world. And I'm going to bring it over until you see that little ring there. It snaps to this vertex here, this vertex. You click there, and what this means is that these vertices and these vertices are now on exactly the same plane. So if I went Shift, Alt, Select here, I've got two rings selected. And by hitting spacebar, I'm going to type in bridge edge loops. Suddenly we fill in those faces evenly and our edge loops are conserved. Okay, so that's one way that you can sort of cut out a segment of something like a circle to make a more complex shape. Why don't we go ahead and add that extra bit over here? And so if we go back into edit mode, let's deselect everything. Let's go into wireframe mode and hit box select. I'm going to select all of those by just drawing a box around that selection. I'm going to Shift D duplicate. I want to go back to my increments, grab X, holding down Control, going to bring this out to about here. I'm going to box select these, delete those, Shift Alt select these two edge rings, spacebar should still have our last operation, bridge edge loops, and now we've bridged those two edge loops. And if we wanted to, we can probably just grab those and bring those in a little bit, just to get that curve a little bit more. All right, now I'm going to delete this dot because what I like to do is instead of having a triangle fan, I do like to have an n-gon. And so if I Shift Alt select that edge ring and then hit F, it does what's known as a beauty fill. And that is an n-gon, a multi-edged face. And it's really easy to handle because if we did something like an inset or an extrude, all we've got to do is hit I, and then we can scale that in, okay? and hit E, and that extrudes that face. And so we can actually inset any number of faces all at the same time by having that end gone. That's pretty handy in a modeling scenario. So far, we're actually getting this model created pretty quickly. So obviously, the next thing that we want to model, this groove and this cog, okay? Let's go into side view here. If you haven't already, go to File, User Preferences. Make sure you've added Advanced Objects, because when you go Shift A, you get a bunch of extra meshes that you can add. And the mesh that we want is under Mechanical Gears. And so I'm going to click on that. And here we've got our default gear, as you can see. Now let's just move this to another layer. So M3, and let's go to layer 3 so we can see what's going on. Under the operation over here, you can actually see that you can create a number of different settings for gears, such as number of teeth, radius, bases, and all this other stuff. You can even, once you've created a gear, save an operator preset, so you can make that gear again just by clicking gears and then selecting from the menu, which is really, really handy. So there's my gear, and I want to create, I think, 36 teeth, and then maybe we want to keep the radius at 1 meter for now. The width can be reduced. Remember, we're working in meters, so any centimeters have to be a decimal. Now, this part is the width from the top of the gear down. It's called a dedendum. And so if we go let's go 0.05, 0.025, and the top of the gear is that, because we only really want that sort of gear. And now the pressure angle, right? That's the top part of that gear spoke. And so maybe we can leave it at about 25. Okay, I'm very happy with that particular gear, so I'm going to go into edit mode and out again, and that commits that to the gear. So let's move this M1 back to layer 1, where I'm going to go into edit mode and rotate this around, and leaving that pivot point in the center. You'll see why in a moment. I'm going to grab that in the X direction and bring it over here to where we want our spoke. Now, obviously, this is a little bit too wide for this area, so I'm going to hit A to deselect, B to box select, G to grab, X to constrain, and I'm going to bring that gear in about there. Okay, so now we've got a gear on the side of this pod. Let's go ahead and model a little bit of the detailing that we need, namely the window, this entry point, and we actually have this nice little divot here for the gear to sit in, which is really nice. So the first thing we do, let's see, front view, the window, maybe we start it around there. It obviously has to be above the center line, but it probably can go around something like that. So let's go into face select mode, Control Tab, face, and with the C key, you can actually select a bunch of faces. Oh, we don't, yeah, we need those ones. Make sure we haven't done anything on the back or anywhere else. Yep, that's right. The way you prevent that from happening is down the bottom, there is a limit selection to visible. If we unselect that and we do a selection, this is what happens, okay? Because you can sort of see through the mesh and it selects everything in that angle. We don't want that. So you click this button, limit selection to visible, and it clips that to only what you see. Now, in Mirror, the inset tool doesn't work great on anything close to that dividing line, but so like we're going to have to do a couple of things to get this right. But I've selected all of these faces. I'm going to hit I to inset, and I'm going to inset that in a little bit like that. And then all of these faces, I'm just going to select them and delete them. Faces, go into edge select mode so that I can select all of these edges, just those, and when I grab them and constrain to the X, because I've got clipping enabled, okay, it stops at that median point. If clipping wasn't enabled, I can actually grab those and move them beyond that median line, and then you have to just basically estimate. So having clipping enabled means that everything along that center line mirrors perfectly and there's no overhanging information. All right, so now we've got those done. We're just going to select these faces here, and I'm going to do an extrude, just an E and along the normal, and I'm going to push that back about there so it looks as though we've got a bit of a thick hull, for things like being bulletproof and stuff like that. So let's just do that one more time for this particular entrance. Okay, this is sort of where the pilot gets in. And now why don't we go ahead and make this this groove here for the gear. So let's go over to vertex mode. In wireframe mode, I think this will be a little bit easier. So A to deselect anything that's previously selected. I'm going to hit Control R, and that gives us a loop cut tool. And I'm going to hit the numeral 2 to give us 2 loop cuts. And I'm going to hit click and click one more time, and that commits these 2 rows. Now, of course, they're not in line with where this gear is. So I'm going to deselect everything, A, box select these, and I'm going to make sure I can grab in the X direction and bring that over here. And then I'm going to box select these ones, grab and bring those over here. And so now what we want to do is we want to inset that entire ring. Now remember our trick to select an edge ring? We have to just go Control Shift Alt, click on one of these edges. Now in vertex select, that means it selects everything. If it was in edge select, I'll show you what happens. Control Shift Alt, only the edges get selected. And we do want those vertices selected. Now I'm going to hit extrude. So now I want to scale both in the vertical and in the depth direction. So I'm going to hit S to scale. I'm going to hit Z to constrain to the Z axis. And I'm going to hit Shift Y, and then I can scale everything in. I'm just in wireframe mode so you can see this. And it scales only on those 2 directions. Now, if by any chance you accidentally, you hit a key and it goes in the wrong axis, just try a different axis. And so now we've got that groove. If we really wanted to show off that a little bit, we can just sort of modify this slightly to show it off. Let's bring that over a little bit like that. And now we've got that groove, and the cog is right in there. And so I want to scale pivoted to median point, scale that down ever so slightly. Now I want to actually have the edges of that cog on the inside to be slightly higher than the edges on the outside. And the way we do this, in wireframe mode, in edit mode, I'm going to box select all of these. And now in side view, I'm going to hit my C key, scale that up middle mouse scrolling until I've got an area that's basically everything that I want to deselect. And now holding down Shift, I click, and I can, if the circle's not big enough, I just click away until only those ones are selected. Now scaling up, I now have a cog with a bit of a taper, a fan, whatever you like to call it. And that's looking a little bit more interesting than just a straight cog. So the guns that I had were pretty basic. They were just a couple of cylinders, and I thought it would be cool to connect them up. But I think I can do much better. And so the best way that I know how to model something like a gun is to take a look at what we're working with. They are cylinders. And if we wanted to do things like have a split or have some kind of, exhaust using arrays, there are a number of modeling techniques that you could use. And the one that I found the best for things that you have to repeat around an object is using things like the mirror modifier and the array modifier set to an object to create something that duplicates around a common pivot. So maybe what we want to do is model a gun on another layer and then bring them into this layer. So I'm going to go over to layer 3 where we've got nothing there, and I'm going to Shift A, add a cylinder. Now, first thing you'll notice is that the radius is 1 meter. We need that much smaller. Let's make it 5 centimeters to begin with, or maybe even smaller still, okay, because that arm will be pretty tight. Vertices. I'm going to make this about a 24. I don't want it too high res, and I don't want too much to distract me. I'm just going to make the depth 1 meter, cat fill type Ngon. This actually is pretty handy, and then align to view so that it's facing us. Okay, so if we go into edit mode, we've got this arm, And we want to extrude a sort of a fatter little bit here and maybe some things that will connect up to the other model. So let's go ahead and loop cut this. Control R, loop cut, and I'm going to bring this about there. I'm going to put another loop cut here, and Shift Alt select. I've got those two loop cuts selected. I'm going to hit extrude, and I'm going to do our scaling trick from before. Scale X, Shift Y for some reason. That's probably because we aligned to view. And when we scale that up, you'll notice that the cylinder scales, but it doesn't scale out of, it doesn't have the front or the back scaling out of those proportions, which is really, really good. Okay, so maybe we want to do one more level here. So let's put a loop cut in here, and we're going to leave this flush, so we'll just do that one. Extrude, ES, X, and Shift Y, and we'll make this slightly larger. Okay, so that's the basic shape of the gun. And let's just do something back here. Okay, what I'm going to do is in side view, just going to put another loop cut there, and in wireframe mode, we're going to box select this. Make sure we have nothing else selected. Yep. Extrude, S, X, and Shift Y, and that means that it will extrude up once. Now just box select these ones, do the same thing, X and Shift Y twice, and then we're going to Shift Alt select these two edge rings, hit W, our specials menu, and bevel these down. Now I want a couple of steps in this bevel, so I'm going to bevel once, and over here in my toolbox I can change that segment to 2, and so now we've got a nicer bevel. It's still a bit low poly, but it means that this looks now like it should attach somewhere. Excellent. So now we've got this cylinder. Most of that modeling work has been done, but now what we want to do is add a few exhausts along here. So let's take 1, 2, 3, 4 segments here, and I'm going to do something called an edge split. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is remove this central face. Okay, we don't need them, and I'm going to go into vertex select mode. Shift Alt select 1, 2, 3, 4 segments. Shift Alt select, and now I'm going to do what's known as an edge split. So spacebar, edge split, right? And what this does, if we select that and hit L, it's actually split off this section from the rest. Okay, it's easier than sort of trying to select everything and then, you know, unparenting it or whatever. And I'm just going to go P to separate selection. Okay, so that means that we can probably delete this larger bit. Okay, we don't need that. And now we're going to add an array modifier. Okay, we don't need a relative offset. What we need is an object offset. Okay, so I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to make the object that it will offset around. And so we just go Shift A, we go down to empty, plane axes. Okay, so this is going to be the object that we're going to offset. Selecting that mesh again, let's just go into perspective view so we can see what happens when that gets edited. We can eyedropper this object, hit the eyedropper tool until it says object empty. There we go. Now, for some reason, it's done a really weird thing. Oh, that's because this rotation has not been zeroed out. We've got a 90-degree rotation. The way to fix this, unfortunately, is to go 0, and then it's in side view. In edit mode, we can now rotate 90 degrees that way. So now the rotation should work. Yep, it should. Okay, so now that we've got that fixed, I'm going to click on this empty and I'm going to rotate it 60 degrees. Okay, now clicking that, I'm going to make sure that merge is selected and first to last is selected. And then I'm going to increase the count until we've got that shape back. Now, what's the advantage of this? Well, I think you can sort of see where I'm going with this. If I go to edit mode now, okay, I'm just going to rotate this right round until it's facing the side view. In side view, we can now start to add a few details. So I'm going to go ahead and Control R to get a loop cut, and I'm going to put, let's put 8 loop cuts in here. So maybe we've got a port here, 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 and here. That will give us 4 ports. Maybe we want to just put a couple more loop cuts in the center of these. I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to set my cursor to selected here, and I'm going to add a circle. Now I can align it to view because we're in edit mode. I'm going to make my vertex count 8, and I'm going to scale that right down so you can see that the circle would fit inside of that square. Now I'm just going to grab that. I'm going to separate this out for a second, because what I want to do is I want to create a cylinder that will cut through this mesh. And now the cylinder actually has to be closed. Now you notice that the array modifier is actually set still on that object because we separated that out. So I'm just going to close off that face, close off that face. So another thing that we could have enabled is something called bool tools. So when we select an object and we select another object, the bool tools become activated, and we can do all sorts of Boolean operations. And this is what a Boolean does. By hitting difference, we now get that object that we selected first cutting into the other object, which is sort of what we want. And so now what we can do is maybe just duplicate these meshes and sort of paste them in where we want them to be. So I'm just going to delete these rows. I'm going to box select that. And I'm going to have to snap these to vertices at some point here as well. And it's not fitting correctly, so we're going to need this entire part to be repeated. So let's delete those vertices. Let's duplicate this. Now, another thing that the Boolean actually does is it sort of merges down all of those modifiers. So that array now is gone, but it served this purpose to create this effect. So I'm just going to go ahead and, you know what, a snap to vertice or vertex would work really well here. Let's grab that, snap it there. Let's just remove these doubles and let's duplicate that. Snap it there. And what we'll do is just because I think there's a gap here, I'm just going to make sure we've got median point. Okay, and selecting all, remove doubles, and Control N to recalculate normals. And there we've got a nice barrel, and just sort of checking the mesh integrity. Yep, my mesh is looking pretty nice, and we've got a nice clean Boolean topology flow, and that means that we can now recap that face there. And so now if we were to, say, add a Subsurf modifier, we should probably get something quite interesting here. So let's go ahead and add that. Now you can see what the subdiv surface does when there's, just a face on there, and this is why the inset is so important. So I'm just going to go ahead and inset that and inset that again because it reduces that fanning because n-gons kind of default to triangles. Now this is all really well and good, these sections, except there's a bit of buckling around here, and also what I like about some barrels is that these every second row is offset by 1, and so we can go ahead and edit that because it's a nice even mesh. We can we can also go backwards and forwards by slicing out sections, and once we've edited something and then reduplicate that, and then sort of offset a couple of those by just sort of slicing out sections, rotating, and then restitching everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, but first I'm going to show you how to get some hard edges. So in edit mode, we go Shift Alt and we select a number of edges that we want sharpened. Okay, so that edge, there's an edge in here. And now because we don't want these faces to be selected, I'm going to go to Control Tab, Edge Mode, and Shift Alt Edge there, and Shift Alt Edge there. Okay, so these edges will be the first ones to crease. Okay, So the way we crease these edges is if we go Control E to get our Edges special menu, you'll see that Edge Creased, Shift E, gives us the option to now make those edges sharper or smoother. And you can also dial in that crease, and I don't particularly like setting that crease to 1, so I set it to 0.98, which is sharp enough. And you can see that those creases have indeed sharpened. We could probably do a couple more here, like those. Shift E, 0.98. Okay, but we do need a little information either side to make those even more distinct. So the way we do that is we just add loop cuts, and we bring that loop cut very close to that edge, and that gives us a much more defined edge. It also works on edges around like this. Okay, so we go ahead and do that all the way around. But what I'm going to do now is, because the methods that I'll be using are exactly the same for all of the techniques that will finish up this gun, basically cleaning this mesh up until it looks spot on. And I quite like that gun. So let's move that to layer 1, along with its friend there. And let's move this gun into position. We'll start by placing it about here. In edit mode, I'm going to select everything, duplicate, and bring this up to about there. Now, of course, this gun has to be a lot larger, so we're going to scale this up to something that looks a bit more proportional to the ship. That's looking a bit good, but of course, look at that. It's a really heavy gun, so we want to bring that forward about there, and we want to bring these bits about there, so they're going to attach to a bit of shielding there. So it's a nice. Okay, that's looking pretty nice actually, which means that this little puny thing here might need to be scaled up a touch as well and moved forward to sort of sit in line, maybe a little bit larger there, but sort of be back as almost like a secondary gun. Okay, cool. So I really like this one. So this one's getting duplicated and moved down about there. Now these little fletches, these little wings, I think need to be set at certain angles, I think. So let's just go ahead and maybe make it a 45-degree thing, and this one can go full 90. Okay, this ship is now looking like it's very well armed. Now these might have to move over just a touch so that they don't intersect with this area over here, but we don't want them to bang up against this gun too much. So let's bring that out a little about there. Okay, so now already we can sort of see that the scales are going to change up a little bit about what we had in mind. So we obviously need to bring this part out a little bit further. We're going to need to make this cog a little bit wider, but it does have to kind of sit inside this diameter, and you'll see why in a minute. And of course, we need to bring this over about there. All right, so now that we've got all of that, we need something that attaches this to the ship, which I think is going to be a nice little shield area which goes on here. So I'm just going to model that quickly using some existing information. Let's go with a couple of rows here and here. Let's duplicate that. Let's bring that shielding out, scale it down about there, and then we'll take a look at this. This is going to get scaled up ever so slightly. It does have to sort of sit in there. Okay, that's good. And now we're going to do that famous edge split. We'll take away all of this stuff, and we will cap these ends with a face. And why don't we go ahead and just scale these out ever so slightly from the center, so it sort of gives it a bit of a curved bulge, I think. Yeah, we scale them out, or maybe we can just sort of grab them and move them up a little bit before we go ahead and recap those areas there. So that's now looking like a bit of shielding. Again, maybe we want to scale these in a little bit, and maybe these bits here need a bit of scaling too. So why don't we just select that, all those, median. Let's see now. Will that look a little bit better? Yep, I think it will. Great. So let's go ahead and bring these. No, you know what? We're going to bring this bit right into there, so we still get to see this lovely detail. So now where they intersect, that looks good. This bottom gun was basically a facsimile of this one here, so we can go ahead and delete this one, reduplicate this one. Let's bring that down, rotate that around, and now we've got our guns attached to this lovely shielding, which should also be attached to this cog. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the mirror modifier on this shield here. We're going to select that cog, and then we're going to select that shield, and we're going to go Control J to join, and now that cog is mirrored to this shield. The last thing we want to do, obviously just to test this, I'm going to parent these guns to that shield over here. Of course, we want that mirror on here too, don't we? So why don't we go ahead, but you see, this has got a subsurf, what does it? Yes, it's got a subsurf modifier on it that we don't want to go onto the cog. So we want to set origin to 3D cursor, and we just want to give it its own mirror modifier there, and that can be anywhere in the stack really. So that when we shift select that, and we just Control P, parent that to this shield cog wheel, and we rotate it in the X direction. Well, check it out. Now we're starting to see something that is looking really, really nice. So I've gone and just finessed up a few things, basically adding a subsurf modifier to the hull, this plate over here, and just sort of making these edges sharp in the way that we did for everything else. So there's nothing new that you've missed out on. And of course, everything still works pretty much as it does. I've still got those guns parented, and yeah, this ship is looking really nice, but I tend to like doing a lot of paneling, okay? So because paneling really gives an object some size, it gives it some detail. So the first thing we want to do is get some segments of this hull that we can actually panel. Now, we're not going to want to panel everything, okay? We're probably going to want to panel around the top here. We want to leave these flat edges, these cutaway exposed bits free. We want to leave this bit. And so we can do one of two things. I mean, the easiest thing to do is just to duplicate that and then just sort of cut away the bits that we don't want. So that's simple enough. If we take these vertices, for instance, there's a nice edge loop here. There's a nice edge loop here. This edge loop, this edge loop, this one here, and we can just begin to delete. Sometimes just deleting an edge loop means that you can split away what you don't need, and then just link select by just clicking a vertice, clicking L, and then X to delete that. And now what we've got here is 3 areas that are ready to be paneled. Now, I'm only going to show you a section because paneling is really one of those things that is a little subjective. So I'm going to show you how I do it. I basically do it by using the existing information and then just adding extra edge loops before I cut away areas. And I like to have everything consistent, especially on a curved. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a couple of splits on this area here. So let's just focus on this area. So I'm just going to separate this by hitting L and then P to separate that. And so now we can just work on this paneling here. Let's move that to another layer so we're not encumbered by anything else. All right, so what's the best way to do this? Well, let's first of all maybe split these edges along maybe 8. That's looking about right. So we can go edge split. Okay, so now we've got these areas. We know where those edges have been split. Now you can already see that there are these little curves here that happen because we've got this subdivision surface modifier on there that we want to keep, but we don't actually want to have these little curved edges. We want nice straight beveled edges. And so the first thing I'm going to do is add a solidify modifier. Now we're going to move that up in the stack above the subsurf and maybe even above the mirror, okay? And you can see that how it changes, all right? And then we can do a few things. We can go even thickness, high quality normals, the inner edge and the outer edge and the rim can all be bumped up so that we get a fairly squared off edge. But there's one thing that really makes this work, and that is an edge split modifier, which I'm going to bring up again up in the stack above subsurf. And now with the edge split function, you can see that we get those really nice crisp edges, even when we've got a subsurf modifier on it. Okay, and so with those two modifiers added, we can go ahead and now begin to etch out those areas that we want. And so what I'm going to do, obviously, is I'm just going to bring in a little plane there, and I'm going to delete these faces here. Now, obviously, you don't really need the edge split in order to do this, but as soon as we split away an edge, okay, you can see there, right, how that looks really crisp and clean. And so now we can go around this particular plate. Let's just split off another edge here. This should give us 8 really nice, even plates around here. And now maybe we can use the edge function to just get these edges deleted. Yeah, that works. That's much easier to manage. Okay, now you can already see that these plates are looking really nice. And so I'm going to bring this back to layer 1 just to sort of show you now how to make them show through. And that's all got to do with the solidify modifier. Right now, the offset is -1 in the direction of the normal. Now, if you want to make that 1, that pops it out in the other direction, and this is obviously the direction that we want this hull to go. All the normals are pointing out, and so we want that normal to be out there. But what I like to do is set it to 0 so it intersects slightly with the mesh underneath. And so you don't sort of get any gaps in there, and sort of just make that thickness a little bit bigger. And now you can already see that that paneling is looking really nice. And so now what we can go around and do is, if you wanted to, not have it show up in edit mode. And check this out. If I put in a couple of divots about there, I just delete these edges. This looks like it's, you know, some tooling can sort of go in there. And as I was saying before, we don't really need that subdiv surface because we've got so much detailing. So if you do need it, you're going to get a little bit of artifacting on some of the finer points unless you put in a little extra detail in there, such as, you know, you do that sort of thing, or, you know, you sort of bring that up there, or even make those edges nice and sharp, and then see how that works a lot better than that, although now these extra edges are causing a bit of a problem. But you can sort of go around and sort of see what solution works best for you. And I've just sort of found that by not having that Subsurf modifier on this particular hull plate, I actually get a pretty good looking hull just with smooth. So on flat shading, it doesn't look that great. Okay, it looks really, you know, early CG, but with smooth shading, it should work out rather nicely. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and add to that hull and all around in my particular pattern using all of the tools that we've already used. And so here's an example of a hull pattern that I came up with. And let's see, the thickness is set to about 3 centimeters. And this has got no subdivision surface on it, and it's looking fairly good. I'm quite happy with that. And so, yeah, it's basically just up to you how you decide to go ahead and add to those details. And so all I'm going to do is use all the tools that we've had before to create the rest of the details for this ship, including some blasters out the back here. You see I've cut out some bullions over here, add some more detail around here, and add maybe sort of like another cog around here, and then this model will be complete. And so I think that is my completed model, and that's looking really nice. I've gone ahead and added some nice boosters here, and you know, these railings here were basically done by just modeling some circles and extruding them, and then just sort of adding this little stick and just running an array around there. That's basically it, and then just applying everything to it. But everything else has been modeled in the way that you've seen unfold here today. And of course, you know, the guns work. Now I see that shield is actually intersecting with that railing here a little bit, and so we can just probably finesse this up by maybe scaling this up ever so slightly, just so that it looks as though this is meant, there we go, that's looking quite nice, to function in the way it does. And so now we've got this fully functioning pod, and I'm really liking the look of that. So let's compare the two, okay? So this is the pod that we've just modeled, and this is what was. Okay, so again, you know, we've got these guns and they look really nice, but look how basic this looks compared to what we've just produced, this beautifully plated sci-fi pod with a lot of detail and stuff like that. And of course, yes, this pod is available for you to download from the link below. So I hope you got a lot out of watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoy the model and use it. And of course, you know, if you use it, just send me a shout out. Say, hey Paul, I'm using it in my comic and I want to show you a page or two. I'd really love to see where this ends up. Okay, guys, thanks for watching. Bye for now.